Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me? If you can hear me, could you please write on the chat, please? Okay, yes, Rodolfo, thank you. Great to see you all here with us. So, good afternoon. I'm Leonardo Guzkowski. I'm the marketing manager for Cambridge University Press Brazil, and I'm delighted to be the host of this session today. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for being with us in this cold afternoon here in São Paulo. And before we move on, I'd like to share with you some housekeeping information. Okay, so the recording will be available. The recording of the session will be available at our YouTube channel. So you can access youtube.com/Cambridge Brazil. And also I'd like to invite you to share your thoughts about this webinar. So at the end of the session, we'll share with you a link to a feedback form. So you complete this feedback form, and at the end, you can download your certificate. So the certificate won't have your name. So you can type your name there and save as or print it. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our guest speaker today, who is based in Madrid, which seems to be very warm. And Dan lives in Madrid, and I'll share his biodata now. So Dan has over 20 years classroom experience. He has taught in Spain, Japan, Ukraine, and his hometown, London. He's also the co-author of Own It, a Cambridge University Press course for teens, and he's a regular contributor of the World of Better Learning blog. So Dan lives and works in Madrid, where he currently teaches young learners, teenagers, and adults at the British Council. So please, a warm welcome to Dan Vinton. Hi, Dan.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm going to share my screen with you. Thank you for the introduction, Leo. Can you see the PowerPoint? And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the invitation. It's really nice to be able to join you, even at a very, very social distance of the other side of the planet. This evening, I'm going to be talking about learning to learn, which is basically learner autonomy, promoting learner autonomy in teenagers. And I look forward to sharing some ideas with everyone. So let me just move here is a very brief outline of today's session. We're going to look at what is learning to learn and why is it important. Then I'm going to take you through some practical activities that can be used in class. I'm teaching at the moment here in Madrid, and I teach primary age children and teenagers. So the activities that I'm going to present are ones that I've tried in my own classes and ones that I think work well. And hopefully you'll be able to go away and use some of those in your own classes as well. Hopefully it'll be a very practical session. There'll be time for Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions, please pop them not into the chat, but I think there's a Q&A function. You can type them in there. And I know that my colleagues are going to be keeping an eye on the questions there, and I'll do my best to answer them at the end. Okay. So without further ado, let's get on with the session. I'd like to start with a very, very simple point, which is that we often think of us, I'm a teacher, I know I'm speaking to many teachers today, and we often think of ourselves in terms of what we teach, our subject matter. We might be, in our case, an English language teacher, maths teachers teach maths, geography teachers teach geography, PE teachers teach PE, etc. and so on. But I think the question can be changed to think about who we teach. And what we're going to be looking at today, learning to learn, is much more focused on the idea of who we teach. We teach teenagers, we teach young people, we teach people who are coming of age in a very complex world, a world that's changing very rapidly. and we need to think, I think, beyond the subject matter that we have to impart. So I'd like us to have that in mind from the beginning of the session. Not only what do we teach, but who do we teach? Because learning to learn, which is the topic we're going to look at, is broader than just the subject matter of English language teaching itself. I'd like to start by asking you to do something, to go to a website called menti.com, and it will ask you to enter a code. There is a code here. Alternatively, you can take a photo of the QR code and go to the website. And what I would like you to do is just enter 3 skills that answer this question. Apart from language skills, what life skills do you think we should be helping our learners to develop? So not listening, speaking, reading, writing, pronunciation, not those traditional language skills, but other skills. It could be a creativity, it could be collaboration, presentation skills, whatever you think it might be. I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that, to go to menti.com and enter the code that's on the screen, 73907900, or to use the QR code to get to the same place. And what I'm going to do is to share your results as a word cloud on the screen. So if you give me a moment, I will just prepare that. Okay. So you should be able to now enter. Oh, okay. Lots coming already. That was very fast. Impressed. There we go. Hopefully, Leo, can you see the word cloud forming? Hopefully you can all see the word cloud. Yeah, okay.
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I'll give this a moment. I can see that critical thinking, the size of the words in a word cloud is related to the number of times that has been entered. So collaboration seems to be the most important one there, and I would agree very strongly with that. Critical thinking, creativity are also there. Autonomy, resilience. Some of these are really small. Self-confidence, social media, which might come under digital literacy, social skills, technology skills, sustainability. I'm not going to. It's still forming. So it's great to see that you all have lots of ideas of the skills which are beyond the language skills that we need to be teaching, or not exactly teaching, but helping our learners to develop. All of these are not particularly related to the English language per se, or to language teaching per se. All of the skills that you're feeding in here, creativity, collaboration, creative thinking, interpersonal skills, self-confidence, emotional, cooperation, all of these are much broader than one single subject. They go beyond the language classroom. They go beyond the English language classroom. But I think as language teachers, we are very well placed to help our learners to develop these, because so many of them, in order to be developed, they rely on communication. And as language teachers, we want our students to be communicating in order to practice the language, in order to develop their language skills. And that gives us a great deal of opportunity, I think, to develop these other skills that you've mentioned there. And the one that we're going to focus on today, which is, I think autonomy was here it is at the bottom, is learning to learn, which is essentially learner autonomy. Let me just reshare my presentation, which is one of the skills that you've mentioned there. Thank you, by the way, for all those ideas. And learning to learn falls within a framework of a number of life skills, which I'm just going to mention briefly, which Cambridge have put together as part of the Life Competencies framework. And I think you'll recognize these quite easily. Creative thinking, critical thinking, learning to learn, communication, collaboration, and social responsibilities. And these are each further broken down into individual areas. Learning to learn, just to read the description here. In learning to learn, learners develop practical skills to support and take control of their learning and reflect on their own progress. Traditionally, this has been called learner training. So you may be familiar with it as learner training as well. The word autonomy came up in the word cloud earlier, and I think that also covers the same area. But to move on to learn in more detail, what exactly do we mean when we say learning to learn? It broadly divides into three areas: taking control of your own learning, developing skills and strategies for learning, and reflecting on and evaluating your own learning. And this is something that can be developed from primary age all the way through to higher education. During the talk today, I'm going to focus on secondary age, so teenagers, but many of the ideas can be adapted for younger or older students as well. And the idea of learner training is relevant at all ages and all life stages. Each of these areas can be further broken down into many different categories, and we're just going to look at a few today. For taking control of your own learning, this could involve setting clear learning goals. So knowing what you're aiming for helps you to achieve that aim. Setting clear learning goals is one of the areas in taking control of your own learning. Another might be self-editing written work. So becoming more independent when you write, becoming more autonomous when you write. And we're going to look at an activity in a minute that can help students in this area. Then there's participating constructively in speaking activities. So not simply asking and answering questions, but actually giving each other feedback, working together in a pair much more constructively and methodically to help one another. And I'm going to give you a suggestion of how you can help develop that. Choosing ways to practice English outside of class. There are many, many ways to practice a language outside of class, particularly English. And I think students are aware of them, but we can also help students become aware of different ways that they can practice more methodically language outside of class. That could be setting their social media default language to English, or it could just be being very methodical in how they use subtitles, how they watch TV series, maybe focusing on a short section, watching it several times, first without subtitles, then if necessary with English subtitles, and finally, if necessary, with subtitles in their own language, helping them to use English outside of class and as a learning source methodically. In terms of developing skills and strategies for learning, one of the key areas is taking notes methodically. Many of my students bring notebooks. Some of them use them well, some of them don't really use them. Some of them use them and never look at them. Some of them, I think, rely on them very heavily. And there are ways that we can help students become more methodical in note-taking. And we're going to look at an idea for that. Reviewing vocabulary regularly and systematically, using spidergrams and mind maps to organize thoughts, working out the meaning of unfamiliar words from context, and recording yourself on your mobile phone, which if it's possible to do, if your school regulations allow for that, is a really useful way for students to become more aware of their own strengths and weaknesses, in particularly in terms of pronunciation. Finally, reflecting on and evaluating your own learning could involve keeping track of your progress. This is related to setting learning goals. Responding positively to feedback. Hopefully, I'm sure you give your students feedback all the time, either very informally or formally. But how students take that on board and what they do with your advice and your feedback is something that we can help with as well. So those are just some ideas. There are more beyond this, and I urge you to look at the Cambridge Life Competencies Framework to find a fuller breakdown of these areas, but hopefully this will give you a sample of the kind of thing we're talking about and that we're going to be looking at today. Just to reiterate, I'd like to point out what learning to learn is not. And it's not grammar, it's not vocabulary, pronunciation, or any of the core language skills that we're familiar with as teachers: speaking, listening, reading, and writing. Those are important. They're the kind of bread and butter of our job, the meat of what we're doing. But learning to learn supports the learning and the development of those skills, but is different to those skills. And essentially can be used in other school subjects and will be useful in work, will be useful in further education, and in some cases will be useful just in our personal lives as well. So it's more holistic training than language skill training. Okay, so let's have a look at some actual ideas. First of all, we're going to look at one for self-editing written work, which is called, or which I call, my common mistakes. Now, I'm sure you set your students' writings, and I set my students' writings, and what tends to happen is they, unless I give them good guidance and we go through it step by step, they write the essay or the letter or whatever it might be, and then without really looking over it, they hand it in. And this idea is to encourage students to look through their work before handing it in. What you would do is ask students at the beginning of the year to take a page in their notebook or a couple of pages in the notebook and to divide it into 2 columns. The left-hand column is my common mistakes. And these are things that that particular student tends to get wrong all the time. And they will become aware of this because you will point out you often forget to add third person s, or you mix up don't and doesn't, have and has, you tend to misuse prepositions, whatever it might be, spelling, double letters, changing y to I, for example, collocations with do and make, or the use of capital letters or other punctuation areas. So gradually the student builds up a list of things they tend to get wrong all the time. And on the right-hand side, they keep a note of the correct form, what they should be writing. And they use this page of their notebook in the following way. Let's imagine that they have a writing task. Here is a problem page online forum writing task, which says, "Hi, Agony Agnes. I'm worried I'm addicted to social media. I usually post over 100 photos a day online. Is this too many? What can I do? Please help." And the writing task is to imagine you're Agnes and to write a reply to Snappy Chappy, the person giving advice, thanking them for writing in and giving them some advice. I imagine the student has written this, and this is their first draft. What they would do is open their My Common Mistakes page and check their writing against this. So they would look to see, have they missed out third person s? Have they mixed up don't and doesn't, have and has, or any of the other things in the left-hand column. And what they will find is they should then be able to identify mistakes. And they have the opportunity then to correct them for themselves before handing the writing into the teacher. If they do that, they're much more likely to remember and to learn from that and to correct the mistake than if they don't look at it and then they just receive corrections back from the teacher. And this works quite well. I think it's very simple. Students just have that page open. They can go through, check their own writing. Obviously, there will still be some mistakes that they make, which are not common, which might be because they're learning a new language structure, or they're trying to express something and they're not very sure about how to express it. But in terms of avoiding fossilized errors or correcting themselves, this is good training, good learner training, and helps them to become more autonomous. A similar thing is correction codes, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, but some of you may not be familiar with. This is the next stage on. So students would have corrected their own work according to My Common Mistakes and handed in a piece of writing to the teacher. And then the teacher, we use a correction code. Here's a typical one that I've invented for this presentation. 3 exclamation marks means a silly mistake. WW is the wrong word. Then you have missing word, extra word, spelling mistake, spelling error, grammatical error, punctuation error, sorry. WO is a word order error, and then 3 question marks when something is just totally unclear. And what happens here is the student hands in their writing. So this is a piece of writing you would receive from the student, a first draft. And then rather than correct things yourself, you indicate the mistakes with the correction code. So you underline where the mistake is and you write above it what kind of mistake it is. So for example, in the first line, most us, there's a missing word. So you underline the phrase and you add MW to let the student know that they've missed a word out. We put our students a writing task. Put is the wrong word. You underline that. WR tells the student it's not put, it needs to be something else, etc., etc. Sometimes it's not clear if it's one kind of mistake or another kind of mistake. So you could add two codes. So for example, in the middle, we have depending on what busy we are, that could be considered a grammar mistake, or it could be considered a wrong word mistake because it should be how busy we are. So there's an element of discretion in how you annotate the writing. But what this does is it gives the students a chance to go through and think about the mistakes, like what is it that they've done wrong, and allow them to correct it themselves, or at least give them the chance to try to correct it themselves again before you correct it. So it builds in, it really develops learner autonomy, that they get to think about their own mistakes and they get to think things through a second time. And then they would correct it. And hopefully it'll be a beautiful piece of writing at the end. I'm just going to read this to you as it relates to the topic. As teachers, most of us will be familiar with the following scenario. We set our students a writing task. The students then produce the required piece of work and hand it in. Next, the teacher corrects the writings and writes various comments for each student regarding the content of what they have written. In the following lesson, or 2, 3, 4, 5, or even 10 lessons later, depending on how busy we are, we hand the corrected writings back. Finally, the students take a quick look at the comments and corrections and then put the pieces of paper away, never to be seen again. Not only can this be very frustrating, it is also a wasted opportunity. A correction code helps students to become more autonomous by giving them a chance to consider their own mistakes before writing a final draft. It is an easy thing to do and saves the teacher a lot of time. Why don't you try it? You need to establish the code at the beginning of the year, let the students know what it is, let them have a copy of it in their notebook somewhere so they know what it all means. And then they need to be trained to become familiar with it, but it works really well. I would always recommend commenting on the content of the writing, as well as just the grammar and the vocabulary. So a comment as a reader rather than as a teacher, I think is also really necessary. So here, for example, I enjoyed reading about this idea. When you write your final draft, please tell me some more. This idea of correction codes is going to be very familiar to all of us. Before I say that, it works very well online. If you're teaching online, which I understand many of you still are in Brazil, you can, rather than have a correction code with letters, you can use different colors and you can highlight different mistakes and then use the comment function in Word if students submit their essays on Word to indicate what kind of mistake. So here, blue for put is the wrong word. Hand in it is this is a word order mistake, and you can choose the colors, and it saves you having to correct everything and gives the student a chance to correct themselves. This will be familiar, sorry, I haven't put a slide, because anyone who uses Word and is used to squiggly red lines or blue lines from word processing software, Microsoft, for example, or Google, they have this kind of inbuilt correction code. Whenever you type something that's not accurate or that the computer program thinks could be written in a better way, or you've missed a word out, or you've misspelled something, word processing software essentially uses correction codes. So the concept online is already familiar to all of us, and I think probably will be familiar to our students as well. And that's a way to introduce to them what it is. Okay. That's writing. Let's have a quick look at speaking. Quite often we get students do pair work activities. It's probably the most common interactive activity that we get our students to do in class, asking and answering questions, discussing something, putting things in order, whatever it might be. And it's great because if you have, I don't know, say you have 36 students in the class, you have 18 pairs, they're all talking at the same time, everyone's getting an opportunity to speak. Whereas if you call individually on students, only one can speak at a time and the other 35 have to wait. So in terms of using time well, pair work activity is one of the key methods, one of the key tools that we have as language teachers. However, it doesn't always mean that students do it particularly well or that they help each other. So one way to encourage them to become more autonomous in a learning to learn sense is to give them occasionally, to give them a checklist. Here's a sample that I've made that you could use. They're asked to think, during today's lesson, how often have you, and it could be these ideas or other ideas, looked at your partner while speaking, listened carefully to your partner, responded to something your partner said, spoken only in English with your partner, corrected your partner when they made a mistake, and then they have the opportunity to think most of the time, sometimes, not as often as I could have done, not very often at all. You need to do this several, maybe not every lesson, and certainly not after every speaking activity, but if you do it with a regularity, the students will become more familiar with what you're asking them to focus on, and you can let them know before the beginning of class or before a big speaking activity, don't forget to bear these things in mind. I'm going to ask you to think about it afterwards. And gradually this helps to train them to become more methodical when they work in pairs, to help each other, to really use it as an opportunity to learn, to practice speaking in a much more authentic way. These are my ideas, the ideas in blue, but you can adapt them as you see fit with your students. I find when I've done this with my teenage students that at the beginning, when I first do it, they tend to put most of the time for everything. They're very, they praise themselves very highly, but the more often that you do it and you kind of talk to them about it, they do gradually become more objective and more aware of where they're weak or where they're strong. And then after that, they start to become more aware of how they can improve their speaking activities. So I recommend trying that. Let's move on to taking notes. There are lots of different ways, and you can find lots of information online about how to become better note takers, ways to take notes to help you revise for exams, things like mind maps and spidergrams. We're just going to look at a few ideas today for recording collocations. And I'm going to give you 3 ideas, and you can introduce these to your students. And then if they like them and it works for them, they can take it away and use it. If it doesn't work for them, that's fine. Different things work for different people. One is simply a collocation line. So here are words that collocate with a promise. And on the left, you have 2 verbs: keep a promise, break a promise. It's a very simple trick, but the students get to learn those 2 phrases together, and they record them in the same place in the notebook, and they become more aware of the importance of collocation and and of what words collocate, in this case with promise. Another one is then you can add words as they learn more, rather than recording them in a completely different part of the notebook. When they learn make a promise, they can go back to the section where they've kept this little note and add make a promise. So they build up a kind of collocation list or a collocation table. Another is 2 columns or 3 columns, depending on the vocabulary area. Here is columns for collocations with make and do. So at the beginning of the year, I asked my students, find a page in your notebook where you want to record vocabulary, draw a line down the middle. The left-hand column is for collocations with make, and the right-hand column is for collocations with do. And then as an activity, I call out these phrases, and then in pairs, they say where they think they should go. Should they go under make or should they go under do? To give them examples. So eventually they will have make a noise, make friends, make a mistake, etc. Do well, do badly, do the shopping, do your best, etc. And then as we go through the year and they encounter more collocations with make and do, they add them to the list. So we have make the most of something, do a good job, do a bad job, make a mess, do somebody a favor, etc., etc. So again, it's much more methodical. They keep things in the same place. It helps to highlight the importance of knowing which phrases collocate with make, which collocate with do. It's useful for revision. And for some people, this is a very useful tool. Then there is a collocation spidergram. So here is an example of a collocation spidergram with leave. A very common verb in English. Verbs, delexicalized verbs like take, have, get, make and do, for example, which have lots of meaning depending on the words that go with them. Here I've divided it into 4 areas. Phrases that mean related to departing. The train leaves at 6 p.m, to leave early, to leave late. Ones to do with exiting, to leave home in the morning, to leave school. Ones to do with finishing, to leave your job, to leave school. and other phrases: to leave the TV on, to leave something at home, leave me alone, etc. This is another useful way for students to keep a record of collocations with very common verbs. And again, as they go through the course, they can add phrases as they learn them. So for example, they could have under departing, to leave on time, under exiting, to leave work, under other phrases, to leave a message for someone, and then to leave university. This works very well with those common verbs like get, which has many different meanings, have, which has many different meanings, etc. One way to introduce this to the students is to give them these three ideas: the collocation line with promise, and then the make and do columns, and then the spidergram with leave, and then to give them a list of phrases which can be divided up, and ask them how would they categorize the phrases that you can now see on the screen. For which of these phrases would they use a collocation line? For which of them would they use columns? For which of them would they use the spidergram? Maybe in the chat, you could just give me a few ideas of which ones you think would work well with a spidergram. So we had the one for leave. And let's see if you have any ideas of how you might divide these up. Some of them go well with a spidergram. Some of them go well with columns. I've got the spidergram for have. Yep. There's no right answer, by the way. This can be divided up in different ways. I can see some people have put, yeah, make, have, do, and play. Okay. I would give this list to the students and ask them in pairs to discuss this and try to find different ways as a practice exercise. You've got columns for do and make. Lots of ideas. Okay. I'm going to suggest one way that you can divide them up, but again, there isn't one clear answer, and students can come up with their own answers as well. Hopefully I can, if I can. One would be collocations with friend. So we had earlier to make a promise, break a promise, keep a promise. You could have a close friend, make a friend, a best friend, a school friend, an old friend, with the word friend on one side of the line and the other phrases to the left. Sports columns, one for play, one for do, one for go. And then as some of you mentioned, the spidergram with have, divided up into phrases connected to food, have a meal, have breakfast, have something to eat, phrases connected to experience, have a good time, have the time of your life, have a bad time, and then phrases connected to speaking, have a word with somebody, have a chat, etc. But there are different ways. This is just one way you can introduce more methodical note-taking and help students to become more autonomous. I recommend you look up things online about note-taking. There's a huge amount out there about how to help our students become more methodical in note-taking. And the important thing is not to impose it. It's kind of offering them ideas, which some might find useful and others might not find so useful. But hopefully if you introduce and you practice enough different methods, there'll be something for everyone, and they'll become more, they'll take their notes more seriously, they'll take them more methodically, and it will help them to become more autonomous learners. Okay, let's move on to developing skills and strategies for learning. And this is flashcards. Now, I think this is flashcards. Yes, flashcards. We're all familiar with flashcards. We've all used them, I imagine we've all used them in our own language learning, and probably we've used them in class at some point, or definitely students will have learned them, I think, at younger ages. And I'm going to suggest some different ways that you can use flashcards. One is to gap the flashcard. So here we've got, I was bitterly something when I heard the news. Here's another one with a gap, to something, out with friends. A translation, hopefully my Google has helped me with the Portuguese here, Google Translate. A picture, and then finally another gap. Have a look at those flashcards and choose one or two, and please type in the chat what you think the missing word is, or in the case of number 3, the translation, or in the case of number 4, what does the picture represent? So if you just put the maybe the number and what you think is on the back of the flashcard, on the flip side of the flashcard. Okay, we've got to eat out with friends. Okay. Okay, we've got some answers coming in now. Good. Okay, margins of insanity, fundraising, hangout. There's always a little delay with the chat function in Zoom. We were online early this year, so I'm familiar with Zoom from teaching students, and sometimes I couldn't tell with the students if it was a delay because of technology or they were not paying attention. But in your case, you seem to be typing in quite quickly. Shocked. Okay. Sad. Okay. So I'll show you the flip side of the flashcards. For number 1, I got disappointed. For the collocation, bitterly disappointed. Some of you had some alternative answers, but I have here bitterly disappointed. To hang out with friends was my flashcard, but there was also to eat out with friends, which works. I've got to raise funds. I saw fundraising earlier. This is an alarm clock, but it could also be early morning or time, but this is a picture for alarm clock. And finally, people on the margins of society, although I saw some other options that you came up with. So flashcards are really useful. They're very simple. Students can make them themselves, maybe not so much at the moment while we're online, but hopefully later, post-pandemic, when we get back to using materials, it's nice to let students make their own flashcards, but to give them a range of ideas of how they can use them. And they can tailor them to the words that they want to learn. They can make them themselves, and they can test one another. You do need to give them some advice about how to make them well. So here are 2 possibilities. The message was loud, something clear, and the message was something unclear. Obviously, one of those is a better flashcard than the other, and it's the yellow one because it tests the collocation rather than the obvious missing word and. So you do need to train students in how to, pardon me, how to use flashcards well and how to make them well. Sorry, pardon me. Once you've made flashcards and you've got like a whole set of flashcards, or students have got their own set of flashcards, there are some different ways to use them, which I think can help them learn from them. And one of them is to use something called spaced repetition, which many of you may know. Any of you who use apps like Anki or Quizlet or Duolingo, the ones where you learn vocabulary and the app tests your vocabulary, they all use an algorithm which replicates spaced repetition. And in very brief terms, spaced repetition is the idea that we learn best when we learn something, and then just as we're starting to forget it, if we then revise it, we learn it better. So it's kind of when things are on the point of being forgotten, where we have to make a real effort to remember them, then we're more likely to remember them, or they're more likely to settle into our long-term memory, as opposed to, example, the night before an exam when you try to remember everything, and you do manage to squeeze it into your memory, but 10 minutes after the exam finish, it's gone. It's based on the importance of when we start to forget things and the cognitive effort involved in that. And all of those apps base themselves on spaced repetition. So the things that you learn quickly, they don't repeat so much. The things that you are having trouble with get repeated at particular times based on when it's going to be most useful for you to try to remember them. And you can replicate this in class somehow. I'm going to just give you one idea, but I recommend looking things up online about spaced repetition, because there are lots of ways to do it. As an example, you could make, the student makes 20 flashcards on whatever the vocabulary might be, whatever they feel they need to learn, or they could make them for one another. You could set the words, whatever it might be. Then the student tests him or herself, and they divide the flashcards into two groups, those which are easy to remember and those which are hard to remember. Then in the following lesson, they test themselves with the difficult ones, the ones that have been hard to remember. And then they divide that group again into easy now and still hard. Then the following lesson, you don't do anything with the flashcards, but 2 lessons later, they test themselves again with the still hard flashcards until they can remember all of them. Then you forget all about it for another few lessons. And then 3 lessons later, when they've started to forget, they put all the flashcards back together and they test themselves and see if they can remember them. Here's a kind of mock time frame. You could do this. So if you imagine, here are your English lessons for the month. The students have lessons on Tuesday and Thursday. On Thursday the 9th, they make a set of flashcards. They use them in the following lesson. The lesson after that, Thursday the 16th, they don't use them. The following lesson, they use them. And then they wait 3 more lessons until using them again. So there's gradually increasing kind of spaces, increasing intervals between when you use them. And this is good training for students, because in my experience from being a student and being at university and being at school, and from watching how my students tend to study for their exams, they tend to try to do everything at the last minute, or try to learn an awful lot of information in one go. And then that's not very effective for long-term learning. So this is a way you can help students become more autonomous by becoming more aware of how we learn. Someone has mentioned in the chat, Luis, that the effort of trying to remember is one of the strongest learning exercises to the brain. I completely agree, and I think this is one way you can encourage your students to come to that conclusion as well. Okay, let's move on to the final thing, which is, no, sorry, 2 more things. Developing the skill of working out the meaning of unfamiliar words from context. This is a key language skill, and that we all need, and our students need to be able to do. And some students are naturally quite good at it. Some are less skillful at it, but we can help them in a very simple way by guiding them through the process. So let's imagine that you have the following text, which is about clothes. The text says, I don't like tight jeans. I prefer baggy jeans because they're comfortable. I have lots of t-shirts with long sleeves, t-shirts with short sleeves, but I don't like t-shirts with logos. I don't like pictures or writing on my clothes. I love trainers. I have big feet, so it can be difficult to find my size. Sorry, that's a spelling mistake. That should say S-I-Z-E. But my new trainers fit really well. They're the perfect size. Size is spelled correctly there. Imagine that you've highlighted these words that students don't know. They don't know baggy, they don't know sleeves, they don't know logos, and they don't know fit. A way to help them work out the meaning from context rather than to just guess it is to give them questions to think about. Very simply, at a lower level, it could be, what part of speech is the word? So at lower levels, it could simply be, is the word a noun, a verb, or an adjective? That helps them to begin to work out the meaning. Secondly, what clues about the meaning can I find in the text? And then finally, what do I think the word means? So here, for example, with baggy, they can work out that it's an adjective. They know that it's related to being comfortable. And they know, if they know the word tight, they can work out that it's the opposite to tight, which should give them more or less the meaning. With sleeves, they can work out that it's something that a t-shirt has. There can be long ones and short ones, and hopefully that will lead to the meaning of sleeves, and also it's a noun. With logos, they can work out it's a noun. It's probably something to do with not having pictures or writing. To do with having pictures or writing, and they can work out logo. They probably will know the word logo anyway, but this is just an example of the process. And finally, with fit, they know it's to do with size, not size. And that's mentioned here with big feet, and they also know that it's a verb. So hopefully taking them through this process just allows them to be a little bit more methodical in how they work things out. Okay. And just encouraging them to go through that process helps them. Finally, reflecting on and evaluating learning. I'm just going to give you a few ideas. Reflection is really important to help students to become better learners, more autonomous learners. We really need to be encouraging them to think about their own learning as well, how they're progressing, what helps them, where they want to go, how they want to get there, where they need to make more effort, where they're doing well, all of these kinds of things, what kind of activities work for them, what ones are less successful, etc. I'm just going to give you a few ideas of how you can bring this into the class. One of them is a little smiley face thing. This is something I actually do with my primary school learners, but you can adapt it for older children as well. They simply decide how much English did I speak today, and then they tick or they color the box according to the smiley. So lots and lots and lots and lots and lots, lots and lots, some but not much, or nothing. Again, they tend to be not very objective at the beginning, but gradually the more you do it, they become more objective and more honest, I find. And then you can refer back to previous uses of this little picture activity and say, well, in the last few lessons that we've done this, you've put some but not much. Let's try to color in the second smiley face with lots and lots today to give them something to work towards based on where they were before. You can adapt the question. How much did I collaborate today? How much did I help my partner today? Whatever it might be. How good was my note taking today, etc. Another thing you can do is just to board at the end of the lesson or the end of the week, some very simple sentence stems. Today I've learned how to, or this week I've learned how to. I'm getting better at. Next time I'm going to, and in response to feedback, thanks, what else could I do? And students just complete the sentences with their own ideas. It just encourages them to think a little bit, pardon me, about the learning process. If you're teaching online, this can be very easily adapted to the poll functions that most platforms have. Zoom, for example, has a poll function, and you can ask students to just complete a poll that you prepare once and then that you use I don't know, every second lesson or the second lesson of the week or whenever it might be. Here are some examples. How much English did I speak today? None, a little, some, but not as much as I could have done, a lot. How well did I work with my partner? Not very well, quite well, well, very well. And one of the nice things about doing an online poll is that you can make it anonymous. So it still encourages students to think about their learning and their progress, but they haven't got to necessarily say how they feel in front of their peers. If they feel that they haven't done very well, but they still want to acknowledge that, they can do that privately. Okay, so we've gone through quite a lot of activities today. I hope some of those were useful. I would just like to ask you, which one or two, as you think through the activities we've done today, which ones do you think you might try in class? I've given them a letter there. So A for my common mistakes, B for the correction codes, C for pair work checklists, D for different ways to record collocations, E for alternative flashcards, F spaced repetition, G questions for unfamiliar words, and the final self-reflection activities. Just to give me an idea of which ones you might try or would like to try, then let me know. I need the correction code for my own writing because I spelt C size as C's and didn't correct it. So that's a good indication of how useful it could be. Okay, that's nice. It would be great to be able to give this workshop face to face and to see everyone and meet everyone. But it's nice to have some interaction via the chat as well, which is good. Okay. Okay, nice. That's very nice to see. I'm sure you do many things as well that you could show me how to do. You probably do some of these already. The chat is going quite quickly, so I can't quite see which ones are most popular. But A seems to be quite popular, which is nice. All of them require some input at the beginning where you explain to the students what it is you're going to do and also why you're going to do it. So you do need to tell students that you want them to become more autonomous, that you want them to become more independent as learners, and that these are some ideas that they can take away to help them become more independent. I think it's really important to let students know why we're doing what we're doing, because quite often we assume that they know why we're doing what we're doing, but that's not always the case. So I think to make it very clear at the beginning that becoming an autonomous, independent learner is important. Katya just asked me which are the most popular in class. The ones that with primary, flashcards have worked. At the moment with the pandemic, this is not really very possible to do because we can't share materials, but previously flashcards have worked very well, pardon me, for primary. With teenagers, the ones where they, the pair work checklists, they take a little bit of training, but where they they tell each other or they say how they've worked in a pair has worked quite well. And the correction codes works quite well. It takes a while for students to get used to it, and they need to be trained to understand the code, to go away and then try to correct it. But then they get to do a second draft, and then they see that the second draft is better, and it's often better from their own effort. So although it takes a little bit of setup and a little bit of effort at the beginning, I think the payoff is considerable. And then self-reflection activities generally, not done every lesson, certainly not done every activity because it's time consuming and we have a lot to get through in terms of curriculum, but done with a certain regularity, I think it's really helpful to get students to reflect. And I find with teenagers that they are aware of their own learning in a way that we sometimes maybe think they're not, or we take for granted. But again, it depends also with different classes. Just to comment on one of the comments I just saw in the chat, yes, I definitely wouldn't introduce them all at the same time. Maybe one or two of them each term, but they need time to introduce. If you work in a school and you have an English language department, with all of the English teachers, you could agree a common correction code that is the school code. And then everybody uses that, for example. So it only has to be introduced once. And then all of the teachers and all the students and all the years know that that's how it works. I have some time for more questions, if there are questions.
Hi then.
Hi, Leo.
There's one question from Dalila Lacerda.
Okay.
She asks, what strategies do you suggest using to engage online students, as they normally resist opening the cameras and using their mics on the hybrid system?
Okay. First of all, I think, where I'm teaching at the moment, we have a very strict child protection policy. So the students are not allowed to join if they don't turn their mic and camera on. Because we don't know what they're looking at in their room, or what they have to have the camera on. So we try to avoid that problem by making it a strict child protection issue. I understand that it can be awkward for some teenagers to want to be on camera. I think pairing students and asking them to collaborate together, this isn't particularly learning to learn, but anything where they have to work together and then present something, and there's a certain peer pressure, they have to work together, can help encourage students to take part. There are, I think, using the poll function, any way to make things more interactive online. The website that I showed you at the beginning of the class, Mentimeter, has lots of other facilities, not just the word map. People can vote on different things and they can see class results, asking students to come up with their own questions that they then have to show to their classmates. Anything that makes it more interactive, I think, can encourage them to take part. In terms of not turning the microphone on or not putting the camera on, I think that's an issue that needs to be dealt with beyond just the language classroom. As we see it as a child protection issue, that we need to be able to see the child, and they need to have their microphone on to take part in the class. And if they don't do that, we take it very seriously and contact the parents. So I'm maybe not the best person to answer that, sorry.
Thank you, Dan. So there's another question from Monica Ferreira. So which suggestion do you recommend for students who have deficit of attention?
In terms of, I'm actually taking a course online at the moment about learn as students with particular learning needs, in particular dyslexia. I think that we have to assume that in a class with a lot of students, we should assume that there will be 1 or 2 students who have a special learning need. So I think that one of the most important things is to, even if we're not aware, the parents haven't made us aware that their child has attention deficit disorder, for example, or dyslexia, we should work on the assumption that there will be children in the classroom with special learning needs. In terms of using presentations, I think making things as uncluttered as possible. So not busy presentations. If you're in the classroom, keeping the front of the classroom very clear, establishing routines, I think is very important, so that the class always goes through the same stages. I think that can help students who feel comfortable that they know what's coming. They don't feel lost. You can go through at the beginning of the lesson what the lesson plan is, what you're going to do that day, so they know where they are in the lesson. I also think making sure instructions are extremely clear, keeping so not to say, for example, now what I want you to do is go to page 4, but just very simple instructions like go to page 4, complete the exercise. I think simplifying things is really helpful for students. I'm not an expert in that though, so beyond that, I can't really answer, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Dan. There's another question from Larissa Anderson. Is there any information I should give to students before the online lesson starts?
I think it really helps students online or offline to know what they're going to do and what the content of the lesson is going to be, or the content of that module is going to be, what the outcomes and the learning aims are, and to explain to students not only what you're going to do, but why you're going to do it. So we got in the case of learning to learn, for example, as I said earlier, we need to become more independent learners. So we're going to do some activities that help us to take more methodical notes, to explain to students that, or it could be that we're going to practice a certain speaking activity so that when we're out in the real world and we don't know the words that we need, we're able to explain things, circumlocution, we're able to explain things without having a dictionary to hand or having the necessary word to hand. And this is a real life skill that you might use when you come to use English outside the classroom, making it very clear why you're doing something, and not just because it's in the exam or because we have to get through the book, making it authentic. I think letting students, again, this reflects a little bit on the students with special learning needs. It can help, I think, to, if there's material that it might help for students to read in advance. Maybe you're going to do a reading in class, but some students take longer, or maybe they need more time, to give them the materials ahead of time, so they have an opportunity to read through them, to analyze them, or to think about them before they come to class. For students with dyslexia, for example, you can record the instructions, so on your mobile phone, and send them a recording of what the homework is, so they don't have to take notes, or they don't have to read what they've written down, or they don't have to read more than is necessary. And it's also good listening practice if it's in English, I think. So my basic advice would be to be very, very clear about why you're doing what you're doing and what they're going to do. Hopefully that's a helpful answer.
Thank you, Dan. And to our last question,
Okay.
How to make a good class for a student that is only able to see the chat?
Okay. I had the opposite. I had a student last year who couldn't see the chat. In that case, I would probably try to organize or try to at least include activities where that make use of the chat. So one could be a very simple one is a dictation activity as a warm-up. You say a sentence and then the students have to, it can be a competition, the students have to type in into the chat what you said. It could be something very simple, the cat sat on the mat or whatever it might be. Students can, there are other activities where you, I don't know if you've done a jigsaw reading in class where you divide a text into say 4 sections, 4 students read a section each, and then they get together and talk about the text and decide what order it was in. You can do a similar thing by giving individual students via the chat part of the text or a sentence from a text, and then in the chat function, they then have to discuss what they've read and try to come up with the correct order of a text. I think that would be one way to do it, although that's quite a tough situation if they can only join via the chat.
All right, so
okay.
yeah, that was the last question. Thank you again for being with us here, and thank you all for coming. And I just send on the chat the feedback form so you can answer, give your views, your thoughts about this presentation, and download your certificate of attendance. So the webinar recording will be available at YouTube channel next week, so you can see there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
A good weekend.
All right. Have a very nice weekend too. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.